Roseline did not know she was already alone until the day Emeka stopped pretending he was coming back. They had married young, the way many people in Awka did in those years, introduced through family, matched by proximity and approval, and set in motion before either of them had fully decided who they were. Roseline was 24. Emeka was 27. He worked at a logistics company in Onitsha and came home on weekends. She stayed in their rented flat in Awka with their first son, Tobena, who was 2 years old and already had his father's eyebrows and his mother's stubbornness. Life was not easy, but it was moving. That was enough for Roseline. She was not a woman who needed excess. She needed direction, and for a while, it seemed like they had it. The second and third boys came within 4 years. Chukwemeka, they called the second one Emeka Jr. at home, and then God's will, the last, who arrived on a rainy Thursday morning and cried so loudly, the nurse laughed and said this one came with a complaint. Roseline held all 3 of them in the same arms, nursed them through fevers, rocked them through nights that had no end, and kept the flat running on a budget that left almost nothing for herself. Emeka sent money when he remembered. His visits became shorter and then infrequent, and then they stopped carrying the warmth they used to carry. She noticed the change the way you notice the dry season coming. Gradually, then all at once. He stopped asking about the boys by name. He stopped sitting with her after dinner. His phone became a thing he carried face down. She did not confront him immediately because part of her already knew that confronting it would make it real, and she was not ready for it to be real. Her name was Vivian. Roseline found out through a woman who knew a woman who worked near the same area in Onitsha, where Emeka spent his weeks. Vivian was 21, worked at a phone accessories shop, and had the kind of looks that men who were not paying attention at home tended to notice. Emeka had been seeing her for 7 months before Roseline heard the name. By the time she heard it, the thing was already settled in his chest. He was not confused about it. He had simply chosen. He came home on a Saturday and told her he was leaving. He did not dress it up. He said he was not happy and that he had met someone else and that he thought it was better to be honest than to keep pretending. Roseline sat across from him at the kitchen table, where they had eaten thousands of meals, and she looked at him for a long time without speaking. Tobena was in the next room. The younger 2 were asleep. She asked him once if he had thought about his sons. He said he would take care of them financially. She did not ask again. He left that same evening with a bag. He married Vivian 6 months later in a ceremony that people said was loud and expensive. Roseline was not invited and did not want to be. She moved back to her mother's compound in Nkepo with the 3 boys and started from the point she was at, which was nearly nothing. Her mother gave her a room. Her brother helped her register a small provision store at the front of the compound. She woke up every morning before the boys and went to bed every night after them. She was not a woman who spoke much about what she was carrying. She simply carried it and kept moving. Tobena started primary school that year. She pressed his uniform the night before and packed his bag herself. When she walked him to school that first morning, he held her hand the whole way and did not let go until the teacher called his name. She stood at the gate after he went in and allowed herself exactly 2 minutes before she turned and walked back to open the shop. The years that followed were built from small decisions made consistently. She kept the shop. She added a second trade, selling akara and pap in the mornings before the shop opened. She joined a cooperative and saved monthly without fail. When Tobena needed new sandals, she bought them. When Emeka Jr. had a school trip she could not fully afford, she found a way. When God's will, her last, was sick for 2 weeks in primary 3, she slept on the hospital bench beside his bed and ran the shop remotely through her mother and her sister. If you are still here, hit that subscribe and like button. My people, Emeka sent money 3 times in the first year after he left. After that, the transfer stopped. She heard through people that Vivian was spending freely and that the lifestyle he had built around her was costing more than he had planned for. She did not celebrate this information. She filed it away and kept moving. The boys grew up knowing their mother's hands. They knew what those hands looked like at 5 a.m. pressing school uniforms. They knew what those hands looked like sorting provisions at the end of a long day. They grew up in a house where money was discussed honestly, where nothing was wasted, and where their mother never once spoke badly about their father in front of them. She gave them his name and let them carry it without poison attached to it. That was a decision that cost her something privately, but she made it anyway because she was raising men and she did not want bitterness to be the foundation. Tobena gained admission to study engineering in Enugu. The day the result came out, Roseline sat down on the floor of the shop and cried quietly for several minutes. Then she stood up, washed her face, and started calculating what she needed to raise for his first semester. Emeka Jr. followed 2 years later, medicine at the University of Nigeria. God's will, the last one, the one who had arrived with a complaint, got a scholarship that covered most of his fees and used the remainder of his time at university to start a small logistics business from his hostel room. They did not forget where they came from. That was the thing about boys raised by a woman who never let them forget the cost of things. Tobena got his first engineering contract, and the first transfer he made was to his mother. Not a small amount. The kind of amount that made Roseline hold her phone with both hands and read the alert 4 times. Emeka Jr. started his residency and set up a standing order so that money left his account for hers every single month without her having to ask. God's will, whose logistics business had grown into something real by the time he was 26, bought her a shop, not a rented space, a property with her name on the document. Soon, she was 54 when all 3 of them were fully on their feet. That year, Tobena flew her to London for 2 weeks. She had never been on a plane. She sat by the window and watched Nigeria disappear beneath the clouds, and she felt something she did not have a clean word for. Not triumph exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that had been waiting a long time to settle. Emeka had not done well. Vivian had stayed for 6 years, long enough to have 2 children with him and run through most of what he had saved. When the money became difficult, the relationship became difficult, and when it became very difficult, she left. He was in his late 50s by then, living in a single room in Onitsha, working a security job that paid just enough to cover his rent. His children from Vivian did not visit often. The 2 women who had raised children for him had both moved on in entirely different directions, and he had remained exactly where his choices had placed him. He sent Roseline a message once through Tobena. He said he was sorry. Tobena passed it along without comment and left it to his mother to decide what to do with it. Roseline read it, set her phone down, and went back to what she was doing. She did not respond, and she did not explain why. Some things do not require a response. The life she was living was already the answer. There is a kind of woman who holds everything together, not because she was built differently from others, but because she decided early that falling apart was not an option she could afford. Roseline was that kind of woman. She did not get medals for it. She did not get recognition in any room that mattered. What she got were 3 sons who knew her worth before the world taught them anything, and who spent their adult lives making sure she knew they knew. That is not nothing. For most mothers, that is everything.